Damn, this is hard. Happy New Year, everybody. The sun has made a whole nother rotation around the Earth, and we didn't go through a mass extinction event. So unfortunately, we are still here. And not to mention, we made it through an election cycle as well for those in the United States without any significant rioting. So I'm truly proud. I truly am proud of my country for the bare minimum it's capable of doing, of pretending to be normal. No, but in all seriousness, a Happy New Year, and I've got some New Year's resolutions. I'm going to do things a little bit differently, right? You could consider my channel to be to not be the biggest, and I probably I think there's a couple reasons I could put my finger onto it, but for starters, to some degree, I might be in a bit of algorithmic HE double hockey stick. So I'm gonna try and do something different this year. I'm gonna try and make some New Year's resolutions. I'm rebranding. I'm turning over a new leaf. New year, a whole new me, right? For starters, no more cursing. I'm not going to do cursing anymore. We're family friendly now. Second, I'm going to avoid digressing topics leading into my videos all being an hour long, because who the hell wants to watch that, right? And then the third is I've noticed a trend that I seem to name a lot of names. I seem to mention a lot of people, like specifically, right? So I'm going to go the whole year without to mentioning any specific people. No more naming names. No more calling anybody out. And we're from here on out uncontroversial, family friendly, terrible takes as not usual. This is gonna be the new usual, right? But hey, I'm already breaking one of those rules, so let's see how long this lasts. But yeah. Anyway, today's topic is going to be Batman. All right, so. I'm tired of unrealistic Batman. Now, I'm not going to name any names because we're not allowed to do that anymore, but I'm tired of unrealistic Batman. And Batman I've been a fan of for my entire life. I've made a handful of videos talking about Batman, not too many though, and Batman is downright my favorite superhero. And I like Batman a lot. However, I think Batman as a character, as well as his stories, often function much better in a more grounded reality, adding some limitations and being a bit more realistic, right? Because when you start to put into the mix of ghosts and ghouls and goblins and wizards and all kinds of fantastical elements, not to mention even just going as simple as acknowledging the sort of broader DC universe, characters like Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash, etc., right? It starts to open a whole bunch of can of worms for a character like Batman that you can't come back from. And also starts to bring up some really good, or depending on who you are, stupid questions. A lot of the issues that people come across with Batman and joke about Batman is like things like the prep time and him just being, over the top in a lot of areas, and him always being the coolest guy in the room, no matter what, right? And a lot of these issues arise when you start to bring in these fantastical elements. They commonly happen when he's standing next to other members of the broader DC universe, or just when you start power scaling up enemies or something along those lines, right? So oftentimes within these stories where he's compared with other characters like Wonder Woman, Superman, etc., ones that are less limited, ones that are less grounded in reality, more just superhuman elements and magic and whatnot, of course, Batman has to be on that same level or higher. So they, of course, have to do all kinds of gymnastics and stretch, and basically just reality just bends around Batman for everything to just work out perfectly in his favor and for him to be the coolest guy ever. There's this old Stan Lee video where he says he gets asked this question a lot: who would win, X character versus Y character? Thor versus the Hulk, or Iron Man versus Spider-Man, or whoever, right? And he says the answer is simple. It's whoever the scriptwriter wants to win. And this goes the same for anything here, right? Same thing for Batman. And usually the characters that people want to win, or the scriptwriters want to win, are the most popular characters. And undeniably, without a shadow of a doubt, Batman is the most popular DC character. He is the most popular DC superhero. So oftentimes these writers will do all kinds of gymnastics and stretch as much as possible in not only his physical but also mental abilities, to the point where it just becomes ridiculous, just so he can always one-up other members of the Justice League. But not just that, even when the Justice League isn't there, one-upping aliens and magic users and all gods even, or essentially gods, right? And at some point it just becomes ridiculous, and this almost only happens when you start implementing these elements, when you start becoming a more unrealistic Batman, when you start removing a lot of the limitations that the real world kind of has. And this is why I think Batman overall works best standalone. And just by doing something simple like acknowledging the other members of the Justice League and stuff and start to bring them in, it changes Batman almost instantaneously in the stories that he's in, and he becomes basically the meme version, the joke version of Batman that people make fun of, where he's just this Mr. Prep Time that's perfect at everything and the perfect fighter and the coolest guy ever, and nobody even comes close to being nearly as strong or intelligent in any field whatsoever, and it's not even a competition. And it comes to the point where, at some point, reality just kind of bends around him. And anything he can think of doing, he is capable of doing, and will do flawlessly without a shadow of a doubt. And it just becomes ridiculous, and a lot of stories end up just becoming a sly handjob to Batman himself. And more often than not, he becomes the exception to every rule. A good example of this is, famously, Batman's known for dodging Darkseid's Omega Beam in multiple stories, right? And Darkseid's Omega Beam is something that's known to be unavoidable. It just homes in on the enemy, and you can't dodge it. You can't avoid it. But Batman is the only mortal who can. He is the only person who can. Want to know why? Just because he's that damn good. He's just that cool of a guy, and he's the best. And, of course, a lot of times the way they can get away with this and the way they write around a lot of things is, of course, to make him so cool and whatnot without having any powers and being able to throw down with people with powers, right, is he's always got a plan for something. He's always prepared, right? He's Mr. Prep Time. But at some point, it just becomes ridiculous. And some things, the concept of prep time is stupid. People have talked about this since the dawn of reality. You can't prepare for everything. You know, sometimes shit falls through, and some things there's really not much you can do to prepare for, but somehow Batman always is capable of doing it. And there's some things that, like the contingency plans is one thing that I do want to pick apart, because I really don't like those things. But of course, Batman's famous contingency plans. He's got a contingency plan for every single member of the Justice League in case they go rogue. And I'm not a big fan of those. I might do a whole video just picking those apart because that seems fun. But one good example is Aquaman. Right, Aquaman's one that comes to mind. Basically, the contingency plan for that one is Batman is going to make a special version of Scarecrow's fear toxin, right, and release it onto Aquaman. And what that is going to do is make Aquaman deathly afraid of water. And of course, Aquaman's the water guy. Here's kind of the issue with that. One, things end up usually being a lot easier said than done. Oh, just get him with this fear toxin, right? Are you going to put it in a gas form? What if Aquaman just wears a gas mask? What if he knows this is coming? What if he's aware of the contingency plan? What if he's able to avoid it? And two, right? What if it does work, right? The part you're kind of forgetting here about Aquaman is water or not, he's basically underwater Beowulf, all right? And if he is induced with this fear toxin and he is deathly afraid of water, what part of that is stopping him from just walking over to you, grabbing your head, and peeling it off like you're a Lego man, right? Afraid of water or not, this man still possesses stupid, superhuman levels of strength and can lift tons, right? And if he decides he's going to lift your head tons off the rest of your body, I don't care what martial arts or how much training you have, or if you're the coolest guy ever, right? I don't care how much prep time you've got either. None of that matters when he decides he wants to peel your head clean off and you're just a normal human being, right? I don't care what goofy nonsense Batman knows. I don't care what martial arts he knows. I don't care if he's the best in the world at every single martial art, right? At some point, a man who can lift and throw tanks, you can't do anything about. Also, going further in this, what if let's say, Aquaman gets hit with you do infect Aquaman with the hydrophobia, right? And let's say he rolls the wisdom saving throw and gets a nat 20, if you know what I mean, right? Because, what do you do then? What if you do that? Because at some point, it's like, this is just an illusion, this is a trick of the mind, and Batman's done this kind of stuff all the time, right? Batman all the time is having tricks played on his mind and whatnot, and then he rolls the saving throw and gets a nat 20, and it's like, oh, it's boom bada bing, it's all good. You know what I mean? What if What if Aquaman has the same amount of willpower to do that? To just see through the illusion? To just be like, no, I may be scared of this water, but the water is my friend, and this is what gives me strength, and I'm just gonna not be a little pussy. You know what I mean? What if that's what he does? Because Batman does that shit all the time. Don't say, well, he can't do that. He's infected with the fear toxin. He's infected with the hydrophobia. He can't do that. Don't give me he can't do that, because Batman does that shit on the daily, dude. I really don't want to hear that. What if you do your stupid, dumb little contingency plan and it just doesn't work? It doesn't work how you thought it would, and it's not as good as you really thought. And that goes into another part of Batman that goes off the rails when you open up this can of worms. The fact that he becomes just the perfect fighter. The fact that he just becomes the best fighter in the world. No questions asked. Not even close. Not even comparable to anybody else. No one without superhuman capabilities can even stand a chance in hand-to-hand combat against him in any aspect, right? Grappling, striking, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He'll beat you at all of it, right? This just at some point just becomes ridiculous, and I don't like this, right? And it always, once again, is correlated with how much hand jobs you want to give him, and how many hand jobs you want to give him is correlated with you know, being next to fantastical stupid things or fighting fantastical stupid things. But usually as they power scale Batman up, he becomes less of the world's greatest detective and becomes more of the world's greatest fighter, and starts solving more problems with brawn instead of brain. And at some point he just enters, well, normal superhero territory where he just punches things a bunch. But not to mention him just being the best, coolest fighter in the world, at some point it gets boring. Where's the fun in that? Right? Not only is it ridiculous and stupid, right? But it gets boring. Good writing works around, well, anticipation. It works around tension. It works around limitations come in that territory as well. And when you know it's just like, well, he's just going to come out on top. The moment he starts throwing hands with a normal person, it becomes stupid. But then you do want to create those tense scenes where you're, you know, fighting whoever, and then he ends up getting his ass kicked. And it leaves a level of inconsistency as well when you don't have any kind of clear, where is his skill at, where is his capabilities at, and once again, it becomes like a lot of the other things, it's just... once again, it kind of goes back to that whole Stan Lee clip I said, where it's just, oh, he's only as strong as the plot really needs him to be convenient for the story and his capabilities and what he's capable of doing, right? And that's bad writing. That's bad writing. The more you can see the seams on the puppet and see the strings on the puppet, it kind of ruins the show. It ruins the experience, right? And when you know that it's like, okay, he's being weakened here and he's being stronger here just because the writing requires it, and the more you're able to see through what's going on in front of you and be able to be less immersed in it, it hurts the story in the first place. And the thing about fighting is it's a lot more complex and dynamic than people give it credit for. There's a lot more that goes into it than a lot of people give it credit for. And especially when it comes to high-level professional fighting. There are no two fighters who fight in the exact same way, even within the same martial arts or school. Different fighters have different strengths and weaknesses, and in those strengths and weaknesses, they have different targets and strategies, and oftentimes have to change their strategies and their targets depending on their opponent's strategies and targets. And in a real fight, there are many micro-interactions going through both fighters' heads that are unseen. And every fighter has their own strengths and weaknesses and skills that they are better at than others. And of course, they must work around those skills and work around the enemy's skills in order to come on top.
Something that I discovered too during my career is being the strongest man in the world. That was my dream when I was young. That's why I did UFC. I wanted to be the stronger man in the world. And I realized over the years, it did not exist. You cannot be the stronger man in the world. This is an illusion. I love the younger guy. They say, oh, I'm the badass man. No, you're not, man. It doesn't exist. You would be strong. You would be a better fighter than this guy in that particular day, at that particular location, at that particular moment. Maybe in an hour, if the fight would occur an hour later or an hour before, or maybe in a different place where the altitude is higher or lower, or a different scenario, different environment, you will lose that fight. It's always a question of odds. You know what I mean? So being the stronger man in the world, its style makes fight. Maybe we're three guys. I beat you, you beat him, he beat me. Who's the best guy? There's no best guy.
Right, that's MMA math, right?
It is like this. That's the way to see it. So there is no stronger man in the world. You say, oh, I'm the baddest man on the planet because I'm champion. It's like the belting is an illusion, the belting.
That's what makes a good fight. That's what makes an interesting fight, when you can see the inner workings of the fight happening, right? And I know Batman in a lot of narratives is supposed to be basically the perfect fighter and has mastered a bunch of different fighting styles and uses them in sort of a combination and has created basically his own mixed martial art fighting style. But it does change from narrative to narrative depending on the thing, right? But in some of the older stuff, like for example, the original Batman the Animated Series, they say multiple times and make it clear that he learned to fight in Japan, and he says that his fighting style is jujitsu.
What is that?
Jujitsu.
Gesundheit.
And as well as we can assume a level of karate too, right? But not only that, the cool thing that I really do love about the original animated series, and of course there's a lot to love about the original animated series, right? But that's that it shows, and he often excels at grappling and prefers to grapple in a fight. Even when going up against guys who are almost superpowered like Bane or Killer Croc, who not only have super strength to some degree, but also have trained in wrestling as well, he's shown to throw down with them and be on their level, if not higher. But when it comes to striking, he's much, much worse, oftentimes losing to just random jobbers that really don't even have a name or aren't relevant at all. Not to mention, he gets outnumbered too in this series. There's a sense of realism with Batman in this series, where he is a very strong grappler, but kind of a dog shit striker, and in circumstances where it comes to striking, he often loses. But when it comes to grappling, he excels in that, and he works around that, and the enemies work around that as well. And it brings a lot more that isn't really necessary for a series like this that's pretty much intended for kids, right, than meets the eye at first. And of course, Batman, in a lot of more modern stuff, is able to take on 20 armed guys without even a sweat, right? While going off those 30-minute power nap bullshit and wearing all this heavy body armor that has to weigh at least maybe more than 150 pounds on him with metal and whatnot in it. And he's been jumping across rooftops all night long, sleep deprived, and of course 20 armed guys come along and he's able to just throw down with them without even a sweat. And as I said, just a lot of Batman narratives overall, when you open this can of worms, just becomes a bunch of sly hand jobs to the character, right? Just becomes him one-upping superhuman guys all the time. And especially, I just avoid a lot of Justice League stuff entirely, because honestly, I just can't stand Batman when it comes to stuff like that, because he's basically written like a completely different character. Batman standalone in his own sort of Batman universe, doing Batman things that is more grounded, versus Batman in a more fantastical, larger DC universe with aliens and magic and Superman and all of that. It is written completely different, and everything has to turn into this sort of sly little hand job towards him, and he always has to one-up everybody, and everybody just loves him so much, and he's just getting double, triple, quadruple glazed, like a Dunkin' Donuts special order. It's insane, the level that they stretch and finagle just to make this guy one-up everybody effortlessly. And just a lot of Justice League narratives overall just usually just become Batman and Superman and doing everything, or doing each other, and just their everything just revolves around them and their own little sexual tension, and all the other characters just revolve around those too, and that's how most things go, right? And this is also another reason, I don't like the Batman Who Laughs. The Batman Who Laughs is one of the goofiest, dumbest things ever, right? Dumbest things in comic history. That's a fairly high bar, right? It's just this one big sly hand job to Batman entirely, and it's just if he just had the killer intent of the Joker, he'd be able to just kill all of the Justice League and the universe just like that, just so easy, so effortlessly, not even a challenge. We'll just skip past him just destroying the whole universe, and every hero and every villain, they don't even stand a chance. All he needs is that little killer intent. If he just wanted to, no one's even close to him. It's so dumb. And of course, a more fantastical Batman and a more power scaled up version Batman, of course, means his enemies and his villains, his traditional villains, get affected by this too. They get affected by the sly hand job curse, right? If you look at a lot of Batman's rogues gallery, they're not, I wouldn't say none of them are superhuman, of course, right? But they're a lot more grounded. They are certainly a lot more grounded than most rogues galleries, and most of his top villains don't even have superpowers, and if they do, they're fairly minor, right? And all of them tend to be relatively grounded for the most part, not going outside of the realm of magic and whatnot. Now, there are of course some exceptions, but I'll get to that. For starters, someone like, someone like Mr. Freeze is technically supernatural, superhuman, but I wouldn't really go that far. You know, being basically a human popsicle and dying if it's not below 0 is not much of a superpower. That's not a great superpower in my opinion, right? And some things, of course, you can go in and say more into the realm of sci-fi, which I'm fine with. Like when it gets to sci-fi, but it's not like stupid sci-fi, like time travel and stuff, where it's just like there's no explanation for this, right? I'm fine with that. Like something like Bane's Venom, just like being a super steroid, essentially, that's not out of the realm of possibilities. I can wrap my head around that. It may not be something in the real world. It may not be 100% grounded, but it's not something that like boggles my mind too much. You know what I mean? It's not time travel or anything. It's just a super steroid that makes him super, super strong, right? And then, of course, something like the Penguin or Killer Croc is a mutant, right? They're mutants to some degree. And even in some versions of the Penguin, he's not even a mutant at all, right? But someone like Killer Croc is someone who's certainly affected by this. Him being the Killer Croc is supposed to just be a skin condition. But of course, in a lot more modern stuff and a lot of stuff with power-scaled goofy Batman, he's just a 20-foot tall crocodile man. It's that just likes eating people. There's no nuance to that. There's no depth to that character. There's nothing interesting about that character, but more older depictions of Killer Croc when he's less of a monster and he's just a guy with, of course, a skin condition, that makes him a bit more interesting. He sort of, in a way, there's a lot to be said about that character, and maybe I will say more about that character on a later date, but the character is, he more uses this status of him being a freak, of him being this mutant, of this skin condition as an excuse to do what he wants, right? But when in these modern stuff, when he's just a 20-foot crocodile and there's nothing remotely human about him except for, you know, he's got some humanoid features, he's got arms and legs, which of course crocodiles don't have, right? It's just stupid. It's just goofy. And when's the last time you've seen Killer Croc at the center of a story, right? Never, because nobody wants to see Killer Croc at the center of a story, because all he is a big monster, and that's what he's become. And of course, even someone like Poison Ivy has superpowers in more modern depictions. You can, of course, control plants and all of that kind of nonsense, and there's a lot to unpack about that character. But in older stuff, it's not even clear if she has superpowers, and a lot of times it's just like, oh, she's got like a immunity to poison is the most you're going to get out of that, which it's like, look, man, I've watched Princess Bride. That's my source on that. That shit's real, you know? And of course, there are cases like Clayface, which you can technically consider sci-fi, kind of like Bane, right? Where it's like, yeah, he's got, they say it's like, usually the excuse is he's able to rearrange his molecular structure or something along those lines, and then they just leave it at that, don't go any further. I'd go in the realm of saying that's voodoo, but some characters like Solomon Grundy or Ra's al Ghul, right? They're still fantastical. That shit's magic. The Lazarus Pit is just magic. The Solomon Grundy is just magic. But when they're few and far between, and it's not that significant, it's not massive world-ending nonsense, it's nothing, you know, they aren't jumping the shark with it, right? It's just like, oh, this guy has a magical ancient pit that revives him from the dead. This guy is, well, a zombie. It makes something more special about them. But when you make it where Batman every single day is fighting some superhuman threat and all of his friends are a bunch of superhumans, and last week he just fought a god from another universe. On a daily basis, he fights hobos behind the 7-Eleven that know every single martial art and can shoot lightning out of their fingertips. For something like that, it makes Ra's al Ghul just Tuesday. You know what I mean? There's nothing special about that. There's nothing interesting about that. And it adds a level of, well, power creep in a sort of way when you start opening these cans of worms. But from what I gather, from what I seem to hear on why, you know, some people don't like realistic Batman, not going to name any names because we're not allowed to do that anymore, right, is that it's, I guess, too limited. Whatever the hell that means. Oh, wait, I'm not allowed to say that anymore. Whatever that means, right? Which limited, for the most part, is just a buzzword. But as far as I'm concerned, limits are good and limits are necessary for a story. If you have no limits and just anything's permissible, and there's aliens, there's gods, there's ghosts, there's wizards, there's multiverses and whatnot, at some point none of it matters. At some point it becomes white noise. At some point it just becomes like the MCU or all these Marvel movies, or just Marvel entirely now, where it's just anything and everything can happen, so what's even the point? And from what it seems like to me is just some people just want to see cool powers and lasers and the whatnot. And the thing about that is that's not what Batman is. You shouldn't be coming to Batman for that. You're in the wrong place if you are. And to me, a lot of what made the Batman 2022 movie really good and what made it great was that Batman was actually, well, Batman. He felt like Batman. It felt like a Batman story. It was grounded and didn't do any of this goofy, fantastical nonsense. And because of that, he didn't turn into this, cum puppet Mr. Prep Time that he has become in modern media and in just any modern thing entirely. But regardless, you don't need flashy lights or cool powers or lasers or time travel or aliens or ghosts and wizards and multiverses and all of this nonsense and galactic threats and whatnot. You don't need any of that to write a good story. Believe it or not, there has been hundreds of thousands of stories told since the dawn of time that have had none of those things, in fact, not a single one, and have been good, amazing stories. You don't need those to have a good story. And in a lot of these superhero movies, that's all they really care about. It's all they go for, especially within a lot of the Marvel movies. And a lot of people say, talk about MCU or Marvel fatigue or superhero fatigue, but what they're experiencing is not a superhero fatigue. It's not a Marvel fatigue. It's whether they realize it or not. People can tell when something is dog shit and when something is not, to some extent, right? And what I think a lot of people are experiencing isn't necessarily superhero fatigue. I think a lot of people can tell when something's just not great, right? And a lot of these Marvel movies, a lot of these, even the DCU movies, a lot of these just superhero movies in general, throw good writing out the wind, have nothing to say, have nothing to offer, have nothing to do, and instead just try to compensate by that by just throwing in as many CGI effects as possible and just trying to distract you from the bare bones or nothing plot or just the white noise plot that they have by just being like, hey, if enough things are glowing and shining in your eyes, then maybe you'll ignore everything else terrible about this or the lack of content that we even have in this movie in the first place. And I think people to some degree realize that. And you don't need to rely on these things to make a good movie. But yeah, I'm tired of unrealistic Batman. I don't need him or want him to be part of a broader DC universe. I don't need all this franchising nonsense. I don't need him to be fighting superhumans and lasers and gods and whatnot. If that's what you're here for, if that's what you want, if you want to see those kinds of things, all I'm saying is there's a lot of other superheroes out there. But yeah, that's about it. Peace.
Answer to all of that. It's so simple. Anyone should know this. The person who'd win in a fight is the person that the scriptwriter wants to win. And millions of people out there say, who would win? Well, it depends on who I want to win if I'm writing the script. These are fictitious characters. The writer can do whatever he wants with them. So stop asking those bonehead questions.